Hey, Heather, welcome to the show.
Hi, Brittany. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. We just realized that we got introduced back in September. It is now April by Eric Dye. Eric's so great.
He's the best. Thank you, Eric. And I'm so excited to finally sit down with you, Brittany. And it's amazing how Femtech has grown and just expanded in so many ways ever since, even since September when we first met. So thanks for everything you're doing to spotlight women's health and Femtech.
It is literally my pleasure. Around this time last year, I had an intern actually make a graph of Google searches for the word femtech, and it was on the rise. But we recently redid it, and I'm talking about like the hockey stick of the century. It is like directly up over 2020. It was crazy. Everyone was Googling femtech.
Wow. Well, I think your show is playing a big part in that.
Yeah.
No joke.
Hope so. I think it's also how a lot of people find it though, too, right? They look up the word and then they're like, oh, there's this podcast. Wow, this lady's kind of weird and funny. Like she knows things. At least that's what I hope people think. Well, we always love to kick off our interviews learning more about our guest. So why don't you give us your story in terms of where you're from? What did you study? Did you have a career before this? And how did you end up here?
Sure. That sounds great. Well, I am originally from the Central Valley in California, and I went to Berkeley for undergrad and studied bioengineering. And so that involved taking all the prereqs to graduate from the College of Engineering. So material science, electrical engineering, computer science, all the pre-med classes as well. And I took as much as I could outside of that. I took some business classes, French classes, etc. And I think looking back, a turning point for me was I did an honors thesis as an undergrad on vascular stents and, should they be coded or uncoded in order to drive the best results. And it was like this kind of, light bulb moment for me as a young kid or student where I realized that there was this whole world out there of, you don't need to go to, or, there are more ways to impact patients in the world than going to medical school. So I got really excited about devices and diagnostics. And so shortly after that, I moved to New York City and started doing biotech investing. So one of the deals that stands out to me kind of early on, this was back in the mid 2000s, was around H5N1 and H1N1 point of care diagnostics, and just really got a crash course kind of in the whole ecosystem that existed at the time. And I got the chance also to, following that, to work in the Obama administration doing science and technology policy. So worked on the America Invents Act, or these were things going on at the time in the office that I got to be a part of, a strategy for American innovation, looking at ways that we can take science and technology out of universities and federal labs and get them into the hands of entities that can help see them to commercialization. Mm-hmm. So I had a few experiences that really gelled my passion for moving science and technology from lab to market, or that whole commercialization process. I went back to school, and while I was getting a master's, one of the opportunities that I had looking back that was really, really helpful was I was a research fellow in the Office of Technology Development, which is the tech transfer office at Harvard. So I was looking at, new IP and assessing opportunities for commercialization in that capacity. I was also a McKinsey consultant doing healthcare and technology consulting based out of Boston. That was so helpful for so many reasons, but you really get a bird's eye view of the healthcare ecosystem in that capacity as a management consultant. And then I knew that I always wanted to work on the operating side, building companies. While I was in Boston, I got to work at some other funds part-time as well. So still kind of seeing the investing side, but really what I was curious about was just, the entrepreneurial journey, this whole lab to market theme. And I was still really into diagnostics and devices and that world. So in the Bay Area, I joined a diagnostic startup as the business operations leader and really cut my teeth in the startup world doing that. And, then I started looking into women's health. The company, and this was outside of work, the company that I was with at the time wasn't focused in women's health, but I started thinking about my own journey to have a child. I got married around that time and really started researching endometriosis in particular when I learned that it's the cause of over half of unexplained infertility. It affects 1 in 10 women worldwide. And so many women experience just absolutely debilitating chronic pelvic pain that is life-altering, life-shaping in so many ways. And the standard of care for diagnosis is a type of really expensive surgery that patients often have to pay for out of pocket called laparoscopy. And the journey to even getting a diagnosis for the fraction of women who do is long. We're talking years. Different sources say different things. I've seen 4 years, I've seen 11 years, whatever the right number is, it's a really long journey. And that means that all the therapies that are out there that could help patients, in the meantime, are not being offered because patients don't know for sure that they have endometriosis. So I really just started reading articles on PubMed thinking, how could this be the case that this disease is one of the most prevalent in all of medicine, yet there's been little to no innovation on the diagnostic side? And what I saw was just countless articles looking at protein-based approaches. So CA-125 is a really common biomarker that so many scientists over the years have looked at for endometriosis, but ultimately on its own, it's not sensitive or specific enough to yield a commercial test. So I came across one paper out of a medical school that was looking at a non-protein-based approach and got really excited. And so I just went down, that rabbit hole, ended up reaching out to the lead scientist on the study, flew across the country to meet him because I was just, I was just compelled in a way that I can't describe to look into this further, and ended up spending the following year working on getting the exclusive license to the intellectual property, and said, hey, I think this is really special. Is there IP around this? Really taught myself how to assess that. And then the prior technology transfer experience came in handy when working on getting that early foundational IP. And that came through in 2016. And fast forward 5 years, and we've been doing clinical studies ever since. The data continues to be so promising, and we're really just as motivated as ever to complete this research and development journey. So that is the story, Brittany.
Wow, I have questions. This is crazy. What a good story. So when you were at first researching, endometriosis on this PubMed and like wondering, well, what tests exist? When was that? Was that like 2015 or?
Yeah, I started looking into it around then. I think that's right.
Yeah. And then do you see like a huge change in has there been a ton of innovation? Like, obviously we're going to talk about your innovation, right? And like what you've been working on, but do you see like when you look up endometriosis, like similar search results appearing, or have we stepped it up in the last 6 years or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the therapeutic side, there has been a lot of progress even since DotLab has been around. So when we were getting started, the classic therapy for endometriosis, was and arguably is Lupron, which is a GnRH agonist. And since the early days of DotLab, a whole additional really group of medicines around GnRH antagonists have emerged. So, recently AbbVie, as you may know, won approval for Orilissa, which is a GnRH antagonist, elagolix. And, I think that there are two components that are so important and go hand in hand. There's the diagnostic side and the therapeutic side. I think, the therapies that are available, though, can only help women if they or their physicians know that they have the disease.
Yeah.
And, laparoscopy was first performed over 100 years ago. And what I was really interested in devoting this chapter in my life to was thinking about, well, how can we shorten that diagnostic delay? So with a non-invasive test that doesn't require, surgery, while not looking to replace surgery, because, surgery serves many purposes such as excision, et cetera, it was really just of interest to me to think about, okay, women's health gets 5% of R&D spend total. I mean, it's just absolutely not rocket science to understand why women's health is so underserved in so many ways, because the dollars aren't there. And what gets me really excited is thinking about, what are the biggest challenges in medicine that affect women? Where the research and development gaps, and actually then doing the work to close that gap and have a product that can help women just on a massive scale. And that's what we're doing, with DotLab. Just recently, we announced a study called Empower, which is the first study of its kind to assess endometriosis and validate the work that we've done over the past 5 years. So we have wonderful sites and surgeons in our study. It's on clinicaltrials.gov. We'll have a minimum of 750 patients from sites like Stanford, UPenn, which is really important because even during laparoscopy, according to our scientific advisory board, when laparoscopy is being performed for the purpose of finding endometriosis, the disease is still missed about 50% of the time. So, our first task and what we've been doing is collecting samples. Like, you can't just go out, purchase, any old samples out there. You need incredibly well characterized samples to study this disease, because the biology of endometriosis is just so misunderstood, or there's so much research left to be done. So so that's what I mean by research and development, and just the importance of the nature of the samples.
Yeah That is such a common thread in femtech, is that oftentimes the founders of the startups are actually doing the science, the basic scientific research around the disease or the ailment, because not only are we trying to make the product work really well, but literally it's like, there's no data. We don't even know. And so you said that there was a test about this to test this protein CA125, but it wasn't like that specific. So what is DotLab doing? What have you made over the last 5 years? What's getting tested right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our test is based on microRNAs, which are non-coding RNAs, and then combined with a machine learning algorithm in order to confirm the presence of active endometriosis. So microRNAs are in the circulating body fluids. And so what the algorithm is doing is looking at the different markers in our test and optimizing the performance of the test in as broad of a cross-section of patients as possible.
And so if what would the future of diagnostics be? If it currently is, you have to go under the knife, what does it look like to use a DotLab test?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think what I would point to at this point is we put out data kind of describing that back in 2020 that was published in the American Journal of OBGYN. But our view is that, patients should have our test performed by a physician to, guide the following care in order to confirm our test is designed to be a rule-in test, the presence of endometriosis, so that therapeutic options out there can be assessed. Mm-hmm. So the first line of therapy for endometriosis is just the birth control pill. Mm-hmm. And which a lot of people, I think, maybe don't know that it is possible to try that to manage your disease out of the gate. And then if the disease doesn't improve over time, assess other medical therapy options that are out there. But that should be led under the care of a physician.
Mm-hmm. It's a blood test, right?
Right.
Got it. Wow. So interesting. Random question. Are the microRNAs that are potentially signaling for endometriosis only present when the woman is menstruating or all the time?
That's a really great question. So that's one of the things that we looked at in the paper from 2020 in AJOG that I mentioned. So it appears that there's no correlation to the menstrual cycle. So it can be offered at any time.
Got it. Wow, that is so interesting. And so, do you think that when your lab test gets to market, and women are not having to go for laparoscopy discovery surgery and they can just do a blood draw and figure this out with their physician, do you think that we're going to see a huge spike in endometriosis simply because it's getting diagnosed faster?
So that's a really, really interesting question. I mean, one thing that I want to clarify is that our test, which is called .endo, so it's designed to drive more efficient use of laparoscopy rather than replace it. So I've thought a lot about the question you just asked, and there's so many factors that will play into it. Because the reality today is we have a misdiagnosis problem, but also an underdiagnosis problem. So how that will affect and implicate the volume of surgeries or therapies issued, et cetera, remains to be seen. It would be speculative for me to say at this point, when we're in a pre-commercial capacity, whether laparoscopy will decrease or increase with our test. But yeah. What we do believe is that .endo will help physicians to identify which women are most appropriate for laparoscopy. Yeah. So, it's just a huge undertaking to go through this surgery. And so laparoscopy should still be performed if a confirmed diagnosis is important, or if the patient would potentially benefit from laparoscopy for treatment purposes, i.e., an excision of the disease, which, obviously a blood test can't do. So I think another example of where a confirmed diagnosis could help would be in the possible, if endometriosis is a possible cause of infertility. Yeah. So we would want our .endo test to assist in a surgeon's decision to conduct a laparoscopy that may involve removing any visible implants and scar tissue that could improve fertility. So, that's why it's so important that our test is offered under the care of a physician, because it's such a serious and complicated disease.
Well, you've been around for a while now. We have a lot of early stage startups listening in. And so did you get funded by grants? Is this something that governments had pots of money waiting around to fund somebody working on it? Or, were you able to convince investors to get on board?
That's so funny you're asking that. And we did not talk about this in advance, by the way, but yes, that's actually how we got off the ground was with SBIR grant funding. So In the early stages of the company, like so many scrappy founders out there, it was all about creative bootstrapping and just making it work. But there are, real significant costs that if you're an R&D company, you do need to be able to pay for, like the intellectual property, freedom to operate searches and due diligence. That's no joke. Licensing fees, laboratory access in order to get to proof of concept, just so many things. So yes, government grants were absolutely instrumental for us. They're non-dilutive. And I would really encourage, your listeners to look into that. And then, yes, to get back to your question, we did raise our first seed financing back in 2017. And then our Series A was in 2019. That Series A was for $10 million and has been financing the clinical studies that have been underway since then.
Amazing. What is your timeline for, maybe listeners who, want to take the test? Like, do you have an estimated timeline of when this will really be out in the market?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I think the COVID-19 pandemic really was a curveball for a while where, the answer to your question is dependent upon getting the results of the studies that are currently underway. So the laparoscopies have picked up again, and it's something that, we're monitoring closely all the time. But if the data continues to come in and enrollment in the studies, trends the way it is now, we're looking at early next year for early access of the test in a commercial capacity and expanding from there.
So cool. So awesome. This is, I just love it when I see somebody meet someone who's been on this journey for a while now, and like, it looks like it's working, because they don't always work out. Right. Like, so when it is, it's like, oh man, this is so awesome.
Yeah. Well, if we knew it was going to work out, it wouldn't be science, right? Or it wouldn't be venture capital. There's no venture. So
that's so true. So true.
Yeah, but thank you. I think it's just like, for me, it's just all about, if you look at, what are the top 10 biggest problems or gaps in women's health, and what can you do with your one life to chip away, at that gap that really calls to you. I think that's what it's all about.
And I had a question about tech transfer offices and IP. I found that really interesting that was like, you did that for a while and then you harnessed it for this company. Do you think there's like a bunch of women's health IP and like tech transfer offices right now, or is there like a huge gap in it? Like, because I also wonder, like, how many vagina labs are out there? Like, how many femtech labs are out there making discoveries, filing IP with their tech transfer office?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to go back to something we mentioned earlier, around 5% of healthcare research spend is focused on women's health. So we're not talking about, a disproportionate representation in our universities and federal labs. However, I do think that if, for founders out there, if you're interested in launching an R&D led business, think about what your mode is. It doesn't have to be intellectual property, but it could be. And if you're not looking to build, a services business, or a community, or, these other types of acute, women's health, or solutions to these types of problems that are definitely, out there, I do think that in licensing technology is certainly a way to stand on the shoulders of the great scientists and researchers throughout the country and world. So, absolutely. I think there are so many amazing scientists all over the country who have devoted their lives and careers to women's health research.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been so much fun. I have two last questions for you that our listeners really love. The first one is, if someone wanted to start a femtech company, what's an area in women's health and wellness that still needs innovating?
Oh, that's really interesting. I think there's so many, it's hard to just pick one. But one that comes to mind right away is PCOS. The other one that comes to mind is menopause. I think that, in ways that parallel endometriosis, PCOS is quite complex as well. And there's a journey to diagnosis there. I think with menopause, there's been a lot of great progress around symptom tracking, which is really important, but there's a lot more work to do.
Yeah, tracking is not like avoiding symptoms or helping that. Yeah, but that's where we need to start, because we literally are missing the data. We don't even have data sets. Yeah, that's right. And our last question is, what do you think the femtech industry as a whole needs the most right now in order to be successful?
Yeah, I think that it just needs growth and capital overall. I do think that we're definitely on the right track, and the Google searches that you mentioned, I think that's indicative of so much progress, but companies just do need more capital behind, the big research and development problems, frankly. I think that's a big gap, because incentives are not necessarily aligned, to take a check from a venture capitalist who wants to see growth on a certain timeline. But you need to do the R&D work first.
Yeah.
So I do think that is improving. And, we've been so fortunate to work with some real champions of women's health and this particular disease, but it's still a problem. And I think that venture capital is, at the end of the day, for founders, taking a VC check is selling a part of your company. I think it's sometimes glamorized, and you may see the TechCrunch headlines talking about these, giant raises, et cetera. But at the end of the day, all it is a transaction in which you're giving up ownership of your baby, your company.
Yeah.
And so, I think that founders just need to be really, really thoughtful, especially in the early stages, about what you're signing up for and who you're taking money from, and for what. Are expectations aligned around milestones, et cetera? And I think, we all know the grim reality for female founders and femtech. So while things are trending the right direction, there's still a lot more work to do.
Yeah. Were you the person out on the front lines fundraising?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And what was that experience like? Did you feel like you had to do a lot of education of people that without uteruses about what it was?
Oh yeah. If you have a 45-minute meeting, that's 40 minutes of it, for sure.
Oh my gosh.
I think, the intentions are good. It's just, it's the reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think though that blockchain startups spend 40 minutes describing it, or do you think people in the room just agree that it's maybe, they're like, you're the expert, I believe you, let's get into the business model. Whereas women, I feel like people are like, wait, this is so mysterious. You must tell me more,
Well, I've never pitched a blockchain company. That didn't exist. That didn't exist when I was on the investing side, really. But I think, or at least it wasn't a hot area. But I think if you're in, say, I don't know, if you're building a food delivery business or something else that definitely has a big opportunity, but it's pretty self-explanatory what you're building. Yes, I think the educational hurdles are potentially different in pitch meetings. However, I think that a lot of investors are very aware that often, the areas that they may not understand is also where the opportunity exists. Mm-hmm. So, in the case of endometriosis, this disease affects 1 in 10 women worldwide, and there are so few examples in medicine of an opportunity like this that's still out there. So I do think that it's, kind of a double-edged sword, where the educational hurdle is certainly there for so many areas of women's health, but it's also just such a big opportunity.
Yeah, that the way you framed it like that, because I thought about it in the beginning of your interview too. The way you framed it though was like there are not that many opportunities in medicine where 1 in 10 people have this thing, and a diagnostics test is still like not here. Like, wow. When you
Yeah.
say that, I wonder why the heck aren't pharmaceuticals putting more money into R&D about this opportunity though? It's just like, is because obviously numbers are not the issue. Like you have the numbers there, like diagnostic test cost times how many people might have it, like do you have any idea, any philosophy that you think about maybe like at night before you go to bed? Like, why are they not funding this? Like, what are we missing? Because I wonder
Well,
that.
I think if this were easy, a test like ours would exist already, and it doesn't. There's nothing on the market. I have heard about, various companies looking at this opportunity, but, DotLab is the only company that I've seen that's put forward validation data. You can look at our publications on our website. This is real science, and it's, the evidence is self-explanatory. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. I think, to your point, it's really why pharma is not engaged. I mean, therapeutic or drug development and diagnostic research and development are just two completely different worlds. And so I think it's just a really different skill set, and requires a different organization and different type of leadership. So
well, your investors are in luck, because I can imagine this is going to be a very attractive acquisition by one of those pharma companies, because talk about, something in their portfolio that no one else has, right?
Well, thank you, Brittany. Yeah, I think, we are still working away, and there's nothing more motivating than just, thinking about why we're doing this work. We hear from so many patients of all different ages, from girls in their early teens who maybe just started menstruating, all the way up through, women in their 40s who talk about how, if they're young girls, they didn't go out for sports, or they didn't go out for the school play because of their pelvic pain and their severe cramps. And, they're afraid of what, starting their periods could do on the day of a big game or the day of the play or whatever it is. And so it's just so heartbreaking how the entire arc of your life as a woman is so affected by, your period, or by dysmenorrhea or chronic pelvic pain. And there's no way to get diagnosed other than surgery. So it's just, it's incredibly motivating, and, like you said, such a big opportunity.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all you do. It has been such a pleasure having you on the show. Keep it up. Cannot wait to continue to track DotLab success. And thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Brittany.